Welcome to our Beyond 20 campaign, a celebration of One Joshua Group's 20 years of service excellence. This is a One Joshua Group production, providing access to information and experts to help improve quality of life and health outcomes.
Thank you for joining us at One Joshua Group for our Beyond series, celebrating our 20th anniversary. We're extremely excited today to have as our guest Dr. Rick Kittles, and Dr. Kittles is currently the inaugural Senior Vice President for Research at Morehouse School of Medicine. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Kittles.
Thank you for having me.
So we've learned a lot in listening to your work and talking to you and watching what you do at Morehouse School of Medicine, and also participating in some of our previous programs. Information about the importance of race and genetics. Why is that important? What makes race and genetics important?
Well, race is, the country was founded on race. When you think about race has been pivotal in the history of this country, and so we cannot ignore it. While many folk want to put their head in the sand and ignore it and say, we're post-racial country, we still have a lot of the baggage that we haven't unpacked. And so I've always wanted to sort of just be, talk about race straight on. And what does it mean? What is the history of this? Really, we call it the zoological concept. It's a subspecies concept, and so in terms of biology, there is definition there in the sciences. When we talk about human populations, though, it doesn't meet subspecies level. When we look at the variation across the world of human populations, and so I thought it was important to really attack that idea that there were biological races of humans, and while it is, I think for the most part, it's been debunked, right? This whole issue of biological race, socially and culturally, it's still still has major impact and saliency in the country, and some wonder, why is it so important? If we go back to, early in the foundation of, when these colonies got together and said, okay, we're going to now enslave one group of individuals and live and gain from their efforts. In order to do that, you had to say that other group was different. The enslaved West African had to be different biologically in order to so-called ethically go about doing that and getting away with it. And so that is how this whole issue of race really became cemented in the history of this country. And still to this day, we have this black and white issues. We can look across all the different institutions of the nation, whether it's economic institutions, healthcare, political, social. Race is integrated across all of those institutions, and it's a serious sort of this racial dichotomy, black white, as if there's nobody else in between.
You just said that we made just a step back to be sure. We're going to ask a fundamental question, because I think we may have stepped ahead. Okay. Can you define race for us?
Well, okay. Well, let's go back to race. So as I said, it's a subspecies concept. So in zoological terms, so these are just like you would have species, genus, race. It's a category of classifying organisms, okay? And so race is a subspecies, meaning that there is, within this species, there is differentiation among different groups of those individuals, such that they don't necessarily breed, okay? And so when you look at the genetic variation and the biological variation across human populations, we don't meet that criteria as a subspecies level. And so race biologically just doesn't exist. Now, we can tweak it and we could change it if you want, but still, it's not the traditional racial concept, which is, as I said, this subspecies level.
So should we be studying race? Was there a better word?
I
really
think
speaks to
I think we're moving away from race because race has this baggage of biology and the environment, right? And so when we trying to understand risk for disease and particular outcomes, we have to tease apart race. We have to tease apart the biology and tease apart the environment and measure those independently. And then when we do our analyses, we look for interactions between the biology and the environment. So what does it mean by the biology? Well, there are genetic, when we look at genetic variation across the world, we see that there's structure there because of family history and what we call ancestry. Groups mate, individuals mate with others. When I say mate, they have babies, they produce with others who are geographically close to them, in close proximity. This is historically now I'm talking. This isn't like, because now we could jump on a plane and go out and have a baby in Hong Kong, you know what I'm saying? or Jerusalem or wherever. But, early in the history of modern humans, folks stayed where they were. And so when you look at the structure of genetic variation, it was geographically structured, meaning that if there was a mountain range or some water, those communities didn't necessarily go beyond that because they were geographically bounded. And so when we look at that or the inheritance of those sort of genes, we could say, well, because of some shared ancestry, that means something. Doesn't mean it's a race, but it does mean that there are some genetic variants there that you inherited because of family history. And so that's sort of where we were going with this whole idea of genetics and genetic ancestry and debunking race. What we wanted to do was dissect race. We wanted to separate out what traditionally in the U.S. In particular, because if you go to South America or Europe, race has a different meaning. But here in the U.S., race was really defined by two things: skin color and ancestry. Okay, that's why individuals say, "Oh, well, I was a black male," but you find out that it might have been a black Indian, not just an African American. It could have been somebody of Southeast Asian ancestry. But traditionally, what we're doing here is we're teasing apart and deconstructing race. That's what we're doing. We're moving away from race, and ancestry is our important variable in our analyses. And it's not just for health and disease, our understanding of health and disease, but it also has some saliency and some meaning for the average person on the street. Let's when you go to the doctor, let's say, and you say, "Oh, I think I might have diabetes or my I have high blood pressure." The doctor, first thing they say is, "Do you have family history?" That means something. And that's what we're talking about here when we talk about ancestry, and particularly genetic ancestry. There is this transmission of genes that you inherit from your mother and father. And in some cases, those genes might increase your risk for disease. So it is important for a physician to ask that question. And it is important for the patient to know the answer. Historically, the black community, we don't know much about our family history, which goes back to this whole issue of how just messed up this whole transatlantic slave trade was and the impact of enslavement in the Americas. But when we look at the just that the meaning of ancestry and family history to the average person on the street, there's some strong sort of utility in that. And I recognized that early when I was in graduate school, because I was just a black male in New York growing up. I went to school, and then I went to undergraduate college in Rochester, New York, and then I went to grad school in D.C. at George Washington. And while I knew a tiny bit about my family history, it really didn't matter. I was recognized on the street as a black male.
As a black male.
Yeah, and so there was certain behaviors and certain ways of being that was defined by that. You know what I'm saying? I was in that box of the black male. But I knew that there was some more information that I wanted to know. I learned early on that we shape our identity by several ways. I mean, socially. We're socialized in terms of who we are. By family history is important in that shaping of your identity. And so if you don't know much about your family history, I'm not going to say you have a warped identity, but it's missing. You're missing something in terms of the shaping of your identity. And in many cases, we are socialized, and we embrace sort of various identities on how we were socialized. But I wanted to provide more information to African Americans who I felt were not provided with enough information to really shape their identity. I remember, because I taught high school and junior high for a little while, and some of the kids in school would, belittle or make fun of, let's say, an African student or a Caribbean student, and they had very little respect and inspiration from West Africa. And they didn't know their history for the most part, and they was very disrespectful in terms of their shaping of the image of the West African. And I said, this is why we need this information, because it could help reshape those identities of young African Americans.
Well, some of the questions I was going to ask you, you've answered those for you. I want to be sure that we get the impact of your journey. You talked about all the places that you were to get you to this point.
I didn't talk about all of them, but I it's funny when I left. I was teaching in Rochester, New York, and then a little bit in Maryland, and I said I wanted to go to grad school and get a PhD. I didn't say I wanted to get a PhD to make a lot of money. I said I wanted to do research and provide some insight and help in terms of the African American experience. And I knew in biomedical research there was a lot of work that needed to be done. I then started reading a lot, and I was always reading, but I mean, really reading scientific papers in the genomic space. And it got me excited and really inspired me. And this one paper I remember just changed my life. It was the mitochondrial Eve. It was the group out of UC Berkeley who sequenced the mitochondrial genome of groups of humans. It was a small group. I think it was probably 7 or 10 people, if that. But they sequenced it and showed that there was variation, and that variation was structured based on family history. And so they were able to trace back humanity to Africa. And that piece was had major impact on me. I remember I had tacking it to the wall in my bedroom. I was in grad school. I loved the science. I loved the story. And that's when I realized that one of the challenges and one of the responsibilities of scientists is to be able to articulate what you do to the general public in a way that they get excited and buy into it or spread the word or whatever. But if you could be a good salesman or storyteller, you could be a good scientist.
So you've mentioned genomics, and you were involved in the National Human Genome Center at Howard.
Yes.
Have we come very far from what we learned then and how we're being able to address, I'll call them quality of life rather than disease and health disparities?
Okay.
From that early information and the work you're doing now.
Yeah, back in 2000, we're talking like 2004.
20 years ago.
Yeah, 20 years ago.
20 years ago.
Right. There was nothing. It was a wide open book. I mean, there were no, there was some loose leaf paper with scratch notes on it, but there was no clear sort of manual, okay? And so we were at Howard, when we started doing genomics and we set up the Human Genome Center, we knew what we wanted to do, but there was no sort of, guidebook. This was during the time of the finishing, the completion of the Human Genome Project. So this is where scientists all over the world were involved in sequencing the genome of humans. And that was a major feat. That was a major investment. And that's when I realized that this is big science. Big science costs money. And if you don't have a lot of money, you're just playing in the sandbox. So economics was always key to what I saw in terms of our future in this space. We had to understand the economics. We had to be financially able to play in that sandbox. And so, there was some ups and downs with the group at Howard, but we were able to move the bar. And then we all kind of went our separate ways after a period and kept continuing to move the bar. So to answer your question specifically, had we progressed? Have we made progress? Have we moved the bar? I think we have, but definitely not as much as I'd want to. I think that there's still, and I think most of my colleagues would agree that there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. We have a lot more sequence data, genetic data. We have a lot more populations that have been characterized in terms of clinically and the environment, social determinants. But now we need to integrate all of that information and do it in a way that provides useful insight for implementation or some level of treatment for the community. So yeah, we still have work to do. I think this is a different skill set that's needed now, though, because back in the days, we were recognized for our ability to go into the community and collect the data, right? We were recognized for our ability to sit in the lab and do these analyses. Do these assays, right? We were recognized for our ability to put the data in data sets, databases, right? But we never really were given the opportunities to manage the entire process. And then also do the analyses and tell the story, okay? At the big picture here, I'm talking the really big picture. I'm not talking about these small projects. We do that for the smaller projects. But for the big projects, like, for instance, the Precision Medicine Initiative or some of these really, really big projects, even the Jackson Heart Studies, huge project, right? But we weren't telling all of the pieces. We didn't really control that story. We need to do that. We need to do that. Yes, we're recognized as folks who can go out and touch people, that who aren't being touched, who are difficult to engage, who are difficult to get to be compliant. We can do that, right? But we got to be able to control all of that narrative, because I think the contributions that we've made early on was just a piece of this problem. We need to go further, and we need to show those strengths.
So we've spent a great deal of time in this Beyond series that celebrates our 20th anniversary, recognizing people who've been servant leaders. Because you just shared with this that we, in order to move the needle forward, we have to take a different approach. We have to have a different level of engagement, and we wanted to spend the time talking to people who are inspirational and to find out what we can do to inspire people to, I don't want to say be Rick Kittles Jr., but just to be, somebody else.
Right,
so what do you, how, and your commitment at the undergraduate level, at high school, I taught high school for about 6 months, and I knew that was not something I
Something you
wanted to do. But just realizing, what do we do to inspire people? We've talked about increasing the number of people of color as physicians, and how research is different. I mean, that's a very different. So how do we inspire people to get excited about reading an article, to pin it on their walls? What should you look for to know that you have potentially what it's going to take for you to be a successful researcher? Right. What do you look for?
So it's funny you say that. I mean, it's very interesting, because I can tell when I meet some of these young folk and the students who's going to be a standout in terms of the preparation to become a scientist. And a lot of times it's just their energy and their attention and their commitment to understanding things. And by that I mean this. I mean, it goes back to even if you bouncing the basketball, or you have a mic in your hand and you want to be a rapper, you just continue. You be the first one in the gym. You be the last one out, right? When I see that in the labs with the students, you can tell, and those are the kids that you continue to work on. But I also work on those kids that aren't there, and so what I mean is this: sometimes kids need to know that you see them, and that you believe in them, so much so that you may believe in them more than they believe in themselves. And I've had students like that. And those are some of the best students in terms of outcomes. When you really invest in those students who are like, I don't know if I can do this. I'm not like you. I'm not. You know what I'm saying? And their confidence is low, and you just give them these hurdles, and they win, and they continue to achieve. But that for me is the most inspiring. Finding those kids and working with them.
How do we better include the community in understanding the benefits of knowing about ancestry, recognizing the value of knowing your family history? Or the ways you think we could improve in including the community, or recreating different kinds of community programs?
I think that they're the two main sort of carrots for understanding family history and ancestry are one is I call it the recreational sort of genomics, where you're like a detective, right? You find information out about your family history, and you're building that family tree, that genealogy. You're building that, and in some of those findings may inspire you to connect with certain groups of your family. I find this interesting because sometimes people may have this extended family, but you don't hear about everybody in the tree. They just talk about one or two people, and that's cool. I mean, it's up to you to choose what is it that inspires you about your family history. Now, if you can, say everything about everybody, that's cool. But for some people, like for instance, I know somebody who was related to a famous African American woman from the Civil Rights Movement. I'm not going to say names, but for this person, their family tree, they know a lot about their family history, but they don't care about everybody. They just care about that woman, that ancestor. That's the one that they talk about. That is the one that they feel that they've pulled traits and stuff from, and that's okay. What gets me excited is that you got excited about your family history, so much so that you've connected and you've built that. And I call it reconciling, reconciling the data, because you get so much data. How do you summarize it, and what's important? Because you want to use it in some way, some fashion. So that's one area. The other area is health. Understanding family history is critical, as I said before, to understanding your health. And for many of us, we don't know. Now, when my mother died of, she had a massive heart attack in her sleep, and my father died of lung cancer recently. But in going through that with their doctors, their physicians, going with them and talking to them, and then hearing the questions about how who they were related to in terms of who had diabetes, who had this, who had that. And then I started saying, well, this is all part of a puzzle that we as a community are not playing or participating in very well because we don't know our history. And so, let's say, for instance, you have high blood pressure and you have a family history of stroke, let's say, but you don't know it, right? If your doctor knows this ahead of time, they could preempt certain things or at least use that in their clinical decision making. We come to the physician. When we present with very little information, and so that's the challenge. And I think that's an area that we can inspire people to gain sort of this knowledge, and then also obviously the genetics. The integration of both of those, the recreational genomics and the family history and disease, when we start really tapping into the power of genomics to predict, for prognosis and for treatment outcomes, that's what we call precision medicine, genetic medicine, genomic medicine. We as a community, we can barely participate in it now because we don't. Number one, we're not in a lot of those databases of genetic information. We haven't participated in those studies, and then also we don't know much about family history either. So when you integrate all of that together, I think it could lead to a much more healthier set of communities.
Well, my next question was going to be describe the opportunities for those interested in race, ancestry, genetics, and health disparities, but I think you just answered that question. Anything else you'd like to add to my question you answered before I ask you?
This is all part of a narrative that I said that we need to really start engaging around and figuring out where we fit in. I'm at a point now where I've dealt with the recreational genomics. I've gotten people excited about family history for health and disease. Now I'm really in this integration around precision medicine because I think that actually is going to be a potential pivot for the health of our community, especially in the case for health disparities. Now, I just want to be clear. I want everybody to understand this. Health disparities has very little to do with biological differences. Okay. We think about heart disease and hypertension and diabetes. There's no genes that black people have that increases their risk compared to whites. It's none of, it's socially determined. Those are social determinant disparities. There are a few disparities that have a strong biological component to it, like prostate cancer, but I'll come back to that later. But the bulk of disparities are due to social determinants, diet, behavior, lifestyle, stress, racism. And so knowing that, when we see these diseases that emerge, and they are genetic diseases for the most part, it's what's triggering those, what's changing those genes in the community, what's triggering them that's causing this early presentation or this more aggressive form or whatever. That is where I think the precision medicine can really help. The precision medicine products, I think, could really be helpful to sort of help to alleviate some of these disparities. But we have to be able to participate in this process. We can't just say, oh, I'm just going to wait 10 years and there'll be a product on the shelf for me and my family. We have to participate. And that's why I was excited about the All of Us, the Precision Medicine Initiative, Precision Health Initiative, where they said we're going to oversample African Americans to increase the numbers in these databases. That's critical. We have to do that.
So the social determinants of health, or social determinants of health, you spoke about the other genetic determinants of health, and you mentioned that prostate cancer may be one of those genetic
Right.
diseases that could be determined. Some of those diseases may be determined by genetics. Are there other diseases that we could think about or you could share with us that have a genetic predisposition?
Well, almost all of these. Let's say, for instance, almost all of the cancers are cancer is a genetic
It's
disease.
a genetic disease.
Now, I'm not saying that when we see elevated colon cancer, higher levels in blacks than whites, that it's due to a gene. I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is that while it's a genetic disease, there is something that's contributing to the higher incidence. All right, and it's not genetics. But prostate, it is genetic. Okay, and when I say it is, this is what I mean. There are some genes that we inherit. Since we are of West African ancestry, I'm talking about African Americans.
African Americans.
Of West African ancestry, that increases one's risk for prostate cancer. And in some cases, increases the aggressiveness of the disease and could lead to lethal prostate cancer. Now, what is it? What are those genes and why? We're still trying to understand. But we do see this signature of enrichment of risk alleles for men of West African ancestry, and it's a situation where there's probably some strong evolutionary significance to that. There's probably some environmental triggers that are also playing a role too. It's not all 100% genetic, but in terms of that disparity, there is a strong biological component that's contributing to that disparity.
Why is the work you do important?
Because my work is specific, and it is specifically focused. It's almost like laser focused on African Americans. I mean, if you look through, I have probably close to 275 publications.
Right.
Almost 99% of them are African Americans. I mean, that's my work, and so I'm unapologetic about it too. I mean, this is my life's work. I feel that it was important for me to be in this space because of the need, and it's important for me to deliver more individuals like me into this space, which is why I'm in academia. And I've stayed in academia. I could have easily gone out and just stayed in corporate or private, but it was important for me to keep a strong connection in the academy.
So my last question: what words of wisdom on this journey would you like to share with our viewing and listening audience?
Words of wisdom. Not really. My journey is still ongoing. So
that's a good one.
My journey is still ongoing. So it's not like I can sit here and say, okay, this is what you do, 1, 2, 3, 4. But I will tell you that you should always be prepared. Always prepare yourself for what's coming around the corner. You might not know what's coming, but prepare yourself so that when things change, you can pivot, and that is or take advantage of the opportunity. Also remember that if you have this commitment to the community, like I have, you will suffer sometimes for it, but you have to be strong and know that this is your calling, and this is why you're here. Also, you got to be open for change. I think that's going to be critical, because I see over the next 5-10 years enormous change, especially in research and how we leverage data. I'm talking like AI and stuff like that. And if you are not open for that change, you will be looking out. You'll be outside looking in the window, okay? Because it's coming. And I think we have to be able to leverage that level of impact and of engagement.
So we thank Dr. Rick Kittles, who is the inaugural Senior Vice President for Research at Morehouse School of Medicine. I'll share with you that he told us we should be prepared, that we should be open for change, that we should be committed. And from Dr. Kittles' mouth to our hearts, we thank you for joining us and welcome you to attend our upcoming series on Beyond, this podcast series. And remember to always be kind and to always be thoughtful. And for us, peace, we're out.
This edition of Beyond 20 is a Life Beat podcast sponsored by One Joshua Group, your strategic source of engagement to improve life through better health, education, and information. For more information, visit us at theonejoshuagroup.com or follow our work on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter using hashtag OneJGCollabs. One Joshua Group, building capacity, expanding resources, joining what you know with what we've learned.